Story number one takes us right here to Seattle, Washington. It is the 51st anniversary of the occupation of Fort Lawton to the day, Jennifer. And I know, Jennifer,
Yes.
you're bringing this story to us. And with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, so I know you have some video, and I just want to preface this a little bit. Fort Lawton is within what we now know as Discovery Park. This occupation took place, it began on March 8th and lasted about 3 weeks and ultimately culminated with the United Indians of all Tribes Foundation acquiring a 20-year or 20-acre lease for 99 years, which is now where not Discovery Park, Daybreak Star Cultural Center sits. So on that, maybe we should go ahead and roll that clip.
Not long ago, people believed the Indians were a vanishing race, but the Indians are not dying out. More and more young Indians are trying to learn about their culture and traditions. That doesn't mean just dancing and handicraft. It means returning to a way of life in harmony with the land and each other.
Why don't you just say in your own words what you have in mind here?
Senator, we'd like to be able to read it to you.
How long is it going to take?
It won't take too long, Senator. Dear Senator Jackson, Kanachitopi Indian Council is submitting a proposal to obtain the United States Army land and buildings at Fort Lawton for use as a multi-service center and a cultural, vocational, and higher education center for all American Indian and Alaska Natives.
A war dance was held. The plan to occupy the surplus land at Fort Lawton was announced. The next morning, Indians stormed the fort from every direction. Some climbed fences, some came up the cliffs from the beach, some rushed through the gates. The Army closed in on scattered groups of Indians. Women were knocked to the ground. Men were clubbed. Cameras were smashed. Movie film and tapes were destroyed. 64 people, the youngest of them 3 years old, were held all day in 2 cells. Next week, the Indians came again, this time in one group, silently climbing the cliffs in the dark of night, waiting just under the edge of the bluff until the first light of morning.
We don't want to interfere with the military operation. Let's have a flag of truce. Who's got a handkerchief?
I did. Put it on the walkie-talkie. No, we might have it. Yeah.
He said that, man, we can't stay here.
We were informed that they had 35,000 troops at his disposal, and he will call them if necessary.
A few, including the movie cameraman, fled back down the cliff, pursued by MPs. The others waited, allowing themselves to be taken away without resisting. Federal trespassing charges were filed against them. The Indians were defeated once again by the U.S. Army. Young Sugar Frank spent his first day in jail, and his family knew that there would be more times, many more times for all of them, and that they would go on fighting because they saw more and more Indian people coming together. In victory and defeat, they were being united.
Thank you for that, Jennifer.
Yeah, so I mean, this is Fort Lawton is interesting because it's situated within this kind of longer history of Indian activism within the Pacific Northwest that led to really incredible things like the Bolt decision, and other gains for Native peoples in the 1970s. But what happened is, this occupation was led by Bernie Whitebear, who was a local Native activist in the area prior to the occupation. And so the night before the occupation, Whitebear organized actually a powwow because he wanted to really kind of bring the community together and not make some of the same mistakes that were happening at the occupation of Alcatraz that had been ongoing since 1969, and of course culminated after 18 months in 1971. But when they actually initially scaled the fences, they didn't realize that there were reserve military police still there. And so reserve military police actually called in reinforcements from Fort Lewis and the SPD. Accounts basically recall that these reinforcements through tear gas. They removed occupants through blackberry bushes into awaiting vehicles. The occupation continued, and as Lonnie Reyes, who is actually Bernie White Bear's brother, recalls, more than 500 Indian and non-Indian allies, as well as increasing media coverage, created this, what they called Resurrection City, which allowed the occupation to continue. And Resurrection City was supplied with food and clothing by local community members. The Army at one point actually became so frustrated with the occupation, it called in troops from Fort Lewis to install nearly 1 mile of concertina wire around the perimeter. But, you know, these protesters remained undeterred, tried to scale the fence on the south end again on March 12th, bringing teepees and drums with them. They were then again accosted by the military police, and then ended up going back out and just, you know, protesting and gathering outside of the gates again. There was a negotiation phase where Bernie White Bear was advised to create this organization, which is where the United Nations of All Tribes Foundation came from. So they basically convinced BIA Commissioner Louis Bruce to put a hold on Fort Lawton land as surplus federal lands, which allowed them to put in an early application for the lands before the city of Seattle, which really pissed off then Mayor Wes Ullman. But Senator Henry Jackson was up for re-election. He had a bad image with Native peoples. He thought that getting in good with them via this route and kind of putting pressure on the BIA to give them some of this land in Seattle was a good thing. And so he kind of, you know, not altruistically, but for his own gain, helped out with that. And so as a result of these negotiations, as I said earlier, they were awarded a 99-year lease for 20 years or 20 acres of land within Fort Lawton, which is now Discovery Park. And so in 1973, the city of Seattle dedicated $500,000 for the construction of a cultural center, and the Economic Development Administration awarded the foundation $250,000. Both ended up putting in more funding because the actual final cost of the cultural center was around $1.2 million, and then it was opened in 1977. So the United Nations of All Tribes Foundation continues on even after White Bear's death from colon cancer in 2000, and it provides a number of services to Native peoples in the Seattle area and beyond, including family services, a preschool at Daybreak Star, a Native veterans program, an elders program, a youth home, employment support, and more. Daybreak Star also holds an annual powwow and gathering over the summer, usually during Seafair, which draws Native peoples from all over the state and beyond. And although it's unclear if that's going to actually happen again this year because of COVID.
Yeah, an interesting thing that I've read in researching the video for you, Jennifer, is some of that footage we saw. The producers actually buried their cameras in the film in the sand along the bluff, and then broke back into Fort Lawton in the middle of the night to retrieve it. They were about 200 feet away from the fence line on their way coming out when they were spotted by MPs, and they described the 200-foot sprint and climb over the fence as being akin to a prison jailbreak. To go ahead and retain some of the video and footage that we were able to play today.
Yeah, no, and so when they went back in on the 12th, the MPs were ready for them. They were in full riot gear, ready for them, and, you know, marched on them, saw them, because they had actually timed the patrols to know when to cross the fence, because their intent was to, of course, occupy from the inside, to set up camp inside. Of course, that didn't happen. The MPs were ready for them. And so instead of, you know, fighting with them this time, because they knew this was not going to be a good thing after how the first incident went down, they just employed tactics of nonviolent resistance and just went limp when they were grabbed, and then continued the occupation from outside.
Jennifer, thank you so much for bringing that story to us tonight. I know that I learned a lot, and I really appreciate hearing about our local history, something, to be very candid, I wasn't aware of until 24 hours ago.
Awesome.
All right, so with that, I think we'll do a little pause for the cause, and then we'll move on to our next story.
Okay.
Hi, Malcontents. I'm David, the Malcontent, and I'd like to talk to you for a moment about supporting independent media. When you support us, you help us bring the before, during, and after. You help us defend the First Amendment. You help us amplify BIPOC and LGBTQIA voices, and you help us hold leaderships at a local, state, and federal level accountable. None of this would be possible without support by viewers just like you. When you become a patron for as little as $5 a month, you help buy technology, safety equipment, and help cover travel expenses so that we can continue to bring you news that you trust. If you can't become a patron, you can do a one-time donation on Venmo, and your dollars will go to the exact same causes. With your continued support, we can continue to amplify BIPOC and LGBTQIA voices while showing the truth on what is happening in the world around us. Once again, thank you. Yes, and when you become a patron, you do help us continue to bring great work and great story like Jennifer just did about the Fort Lawton occupation. You help us with safety gear, paying for writers, and paying for some of the content, including some of the content that we're going to show you later on tonight. And we know that we really appreciate and mad love to our patrons. Go ahead and spam those hearts to our patrons and the people also that do Venmo. I haven't said this in a while. You just even toss $5 in the Venmo jar. $5 donations buys us a news story. So it actually goes a lot further than what you think. So